Hey guys, welcome back to the Bulwark. I am joined by Congressman Khanna of California to talk all things DOGE. We are going to get into that right away. But first, before we start, as always, do subscribe to our channel. It's right there, a little button. We appreciate it. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Let me just start out sort of generally. What is your understanding of what DOGE is going to do and what it can do?
My understanding is that they will be providing recommendations to the Congress and to the president for how to make government more effective and to cut waste, fraud, and abuse from government. What I have said is when it comes to Social Security, when it comes to Medicare, I will oppose with every fiber of my being any cut, and same with the CFPB. But when you look at the federal budget, the discretionary budget, the vast majority, 56%, is defense. And when it comes to making strategic cuts to defense to make our national security more competitive with the procurement process and a better modern national security, I look forward to working with DOGE on that.
Yeah, so you are among a handful of Democrats who have been more willing to participate in DOGE and lend your credibility and expertise. Others in your caucus, frankly, don't want to be involved in it. They think of it as a vehicle for domestic discretionary cuts, and they think it's illegitimate that DOGE really is just supplanting what Congress itself is supposed to do. Are your Democratic colleagues wrong who are critical of DOGE?
Well, they're not wrong to criticize cuts in Social Security and Medicare and to be concerned about cuts to the CFPB. So, to the extent that they're speaking out about that, that's perfectly legitimate. My view is that the Democratic Party should be opposed to wasteful spending. And
Yeah.
that wasteful spending, FDR in his New Deal speech in 1932 talked about being opposed to wasteful government spending. Barack Obama talked about being opposed to wasteful government spending. So we can be opposed to the wasteful spending, of course, in DOD, where it's particularly manifest with the five crimes. But if they find duplicative agencies that are not spending every dollar the most effectively and can come up with ways to make government more effective, I think we have to have an open mind as long as they're not targeting en masse sort of federal civilians or
Right.
deregulations or
Well,
cutting Social Security.
what role do you believe you'll have here? Are you going to advise Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk and whoever else is there? Are you there to participate in this? I guess there's a House committee that's developing around it. I mean, what is your actual involvement going to look like?
Well, I think it's going to be willingness to convene other people on the committee or Democrats who have ideas about how we can make the Department of Defense more competitive or how we can make our government more effective, soliciting stories about where there is waste and passing on that information in a publicly transparent way. I don't think there is any contradiction between being a progressive that believes in government being effective and not having wasteful spending. In fact, the entire
I know,
progressive.
I understand that, but I'm just sort of curious. Are you going to talk with the DOGE personnel? Are you going to work with this House committee that's kind of developing to advise and work with the DOGE personnel? I mean, how exactly are you going to be involved in this?
Well, I will work across party lines to. I mean, I know obviously Elon and Vivek,
Right.
so I could, share my perspective anytime with them. But I would look to maybe convene something in January or February, and I'm on the relevant committees of oversight and House Armed Services. I don't know if we could have committee hearings in those committees. So there's a process for how to be involved. But I look forward to playing a constructive role in DOD spending and to be oppositional, fiercely oppositional if they touch CFPB, Social Security, Medicare, or some of the domestic programs, or if they start to deregulate on the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act.
Yeah, the I guess the question that everyone is sort of asking is what kind of authority they have, right? You say they're going to make recommendations, and then that those recommendations will then potentially be implemented or voted on by Congress. There's also reporting that they are looking to kind of push the boundaries when it comes to executive action in terms of basically instructing President Trump at that point not to spend money that Congress itself has appropriated. Do you think that's possible that they could do that? Obviously, it would face a immense amount of legal challenges. Would you oppose them doing that?
I would. I mean, I think there's the Impound Act, which allows them
Yeah,
to do that up to 45 days. They still have to notify Congress, and after 45 days, Congress needs to act. So my reading, I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but my reading of it is that Congress has the final authority on a lot of these things. Now, if they're trying to fire federal civilian workforce, there's a process for that. There's a whole board that they have to go through. And certainly I've spoken out about the Project 2025 project of firing 50,000 federal civilian workers. I think almost all our federal workforce is doing good work. But if they have ideas, as Obama talked about, of reorganization that would make the government more effective, or if there are programs there
sure.
that are totally wasteful, then of course the Democrats should be willing to look at waste and abuse.
Why is this any different than well, during the Obama era, obviously we ended up with sequestration, but we also ended up with a super committee to basically come up with a massive amount of deficit and debt reduction.
The Bowles
Why?
Commission, the
Yeah,
Bowles
the Simpson
Bowles
Bowles
Simpson,
Commission.
yeah.
Yes, I lived through it. I still carry the scars of covering it. But why is this any different than that?
My understanding is, I could be wrong. Did the House Speaker and Majority Leader also, or Minority Leader, get appointees on that Bowles Simpson Commission?
I do
I don't,
believe they did. Yes.
so that's one difference.
Yeah.
But your point about, it's a recommendation, and the Congress will act, is it stands. In fact, I was very opposed to the Bowles Simpson Commission because they were calling for cuts to Social Security and
Right.
Medicare, and I'm not for those Social Security and Medicare cuts. Here, my hope is, given Elon's experience with SpaceX, that the focus is going to be on the five primes and disruption and more competition.
Right. SpaceX, the history there is that he comes in, he disrupts what's sort of a lethargic bureaucratic process around space exploration. We end up seeing, a huge amount of development and efficiency. I guess the sort of the negative version of this is what he did with Twitter, which is he fired 70 to 80% of the workforce, and just said, I'm going to make something work with less personnel. Do you fear that there's going to be we just talked about it, but mass firings or relocation of workers in hopes that they just quit?
Well, I would oppose that, and of course, that would be legally challenged, and he'd have to get the buy-in, in my view, of Congress, if Congress has funded those positions. And I would be opposed to that kind of mass firing. If the government is different than a private company.
And are you confident that they will not touch Social Security and Medicare? Obviously, Donald Trump on the campaign trail has said repeatedly he wouldn't, but then twice now, at least, Elon Musk has shared a post on his platform with people talking about going after Social Security. They couch it by saying, well, it's just going after Social Security, corruption. But obviously, there's a danger that sort of veers into reducing payment benefits, for instance.
No, I'm not confident. That's why I prefaced everything with saying we would
Yeah,
need to
we would
fight to
vote
make
it.
sure that we don't have a cut in Social Security and Medicare. I guess my point is, look, I rather Kamala Harris had become president.
Sure.
Obviously, I probably, if Harris would become president, there are other ways of doing things in terms of defense, contracting and reform than creating DOGE. But we lost the election. Now we have the other party in power. And my view is, where there's good policy objectives, we have to be willing to cross party lines to put the American people first, being vigilant, understanding that there are going to be places to oppose, and understanding that there's some risk. But what's the alternative? That we just all retreat to our camps and never be willing to cross the aisle to look for common ground? I don't think that's what the American people want.
No, it's a good question. It sort of gets to a philosophical one, which is, during the first Trump years, obviously, I think it was met with almost immediate resistance, right? You saw the march right after the inauguration, and then real antipathy towards what he was doing. Are you picking up somewhat of a different vibe this go around, where it's like, look, he won, and he also won the popular vote. We need to, as Democrats, we need to kind of rethink how we approach this.
No, look, Donald Trump signed 5 pieces of my legislation. I had the same approach when he was president the first time. I
Mm.
opposed him very strongly on family separation. I opposed him very strongly on his tax cuts. But where there was areas that we could do things for the country, I was willing to work with him. And I think we need to have the same approach here. If he does things that I deeply am opposed to, Social Security cuts, cuts in Medicare, mass deportation and asking people for paperwork across uh, businesses, ending birthright citizenship. I will be very, very vocal, and I expect others will too. But if there are places we can make progress, then we need to cross party lines to do it. One of the tragedies, if they had asked me how to deploy Elon Musk, I would have said he should have been one of the dollar a year FDR people who basically came into government to help build things. And the problem with Intel, they just pushed out Gelsinger. And my question is, how about having Elon working with some unions try to turn that around so we can build factories here and don't lose all of our semiconductors to China? So there are places where we do need business leadership to help build things in this country and with the government. And that was FDR's model. It wasn't mine.
Sure. Well, on Elon specifically, people are a little bit troubled, I guess, by the fact that someone who is a private citizen, albeit the richest person in the world, does seem to have just this outstanding influence in the current construction of our government. It's not just DOGE. He's traveling with President-elect Trump overseas. He's on the phone call with world leaders. Obviously, I mean, I think you have to admit there's obvious conflicts of interest when a massive government contractor is also overseeing government spending and reduction, right? I mean, is that not troubling at all?
Well, I think there should be transparency. I think he would have to do the same financial disclosures that I have to do, that the presidents need to do. I think there should be complete transparency in those interests, and he should recuse himself if there's a conflict of interest. I mean, I think
But
there
there's
are.
an inherent conflict of interest here, right? He's going over the budget lines of the government. He also happens to be a major government contractor.
Well, I think that those are ways you deal with a conflict of interest. Like if he got elected to Congress, or you can't get
But he's
elected
not
president.
elected. He doesn't have to disclose anything. No one's forcing him to disclose
Well, I would have
any
disclosure.
financials.
I would have disclosure requirements for these positions, the way you have for Senate confirmed, or I don't know the ethics of what the White House chief of staff has to do, or
Sure.
positions of responsibility. But I would say that have those
So
transparency
you
and
think
this.
he and Vivek should disclose their finances if they are going to go forward with DOGE?
Absolutely, I just assumed that they would put them through a financial disclosure process and conflict of interest process. I mean, absolutely, that to me strikes me as a very reasonable request. Half their stuff is
The-
all public anyway. I don't know why they wouldn't want to just put it
Well,
out
I
there, of
mean,
course.
I don't think anyone expects that when DOGE comes out with its findings in whatever July 2026, if it takes that long, that one of the recommendations they're going to have is that in fact SpaceX should probably take fewer government contracts. No one expects that Elon's going to cut his own business.
Well, look, SpaceX was extraordinarily transformative. I mean, they had
Right,
Boeing, Lockheed basically ripping off the American people, and Barack Obama and Ash Carter said, "Why are we doing this? And
right,
let's push through the bureaucracy." And SpaceX came in and at a fraction of the cost created an
right,
innovation. So, what I want is more SpaceXs that are disrupting the
right. I guess
incumbent
my point was
price
more in the
place.
general. My point was more in the general. No one expects that Elon's going to take a haircut here, or Vivek for that matter.
Well, I think there should be. That's why there should be complete financial transparency. There should be a disclosure of financial interest. I would hope that Elon, will put the country first, and when he looks at that, but I'm all for financial transparency. I mean,
You're
that's.
you're one of the few people who actually has a on the Democratic side at least who actually has like a functioning good relationship with Elon. What's your take on how he's viewing this current role that he's occupying?
Well, I think Elon Musk is fundamentally a builder, and he builds great companies we've had philosophical disagreements. I think when he got the Tesla grant, he should have had labor neutrality. And,
Yeah.
I was a supporter of unionization. I think unions can add to productivity, but there's no denying with Starlink, with Tesla, with SpaceX, with PayPal. He's obviously a very successful entrepreneur. And I think he believes that the United States should build more things and the taxpayers should get value for what we build. And the question is, do we have differences? Yeah, I think unions have to have a bigger role. Federal government should have a bigger role in financing. But his motive, in my view, is to try to build things in America and to make government, the taxpayer dollar, go as far as it can.
His journey is really fascinating. Where to a degree, I mean, he was kind of a poster child of what government can help private sector do during the Obama era, right? Tesla was crowning achievement. He was a supporter of Democrats, and then obviously over the past couple of years, he drifted clearly to Donald Trump. Do you think there was a path that could have been taken for Democrats? I know that there was talk on the Harris campaign about engaging with him, and they declined to do so. Was that a mistake?
So I think let's put this not in partisan politics. I'll get to the
Sure.
partisan politics, but let's
Yeah.
look at, you have a view of a country, which is, I think Biden's view, and certainly my view, that a lot of wealth is piled up in Silicon Valley, $12 trillion in my district. We hollowed out industry after industry in this country. You go through small towns, you go through rural America, and if there's not a hospital, a prison, or a university, often those towns have been boarded up in Main Street. People have been suffering economically. We need a manufacturing renaissance in America. We need new economic activity in America. We need to bring new technology and prosperity to places that have been deindustrialized. You can't do that without incredible business technology leaders. You need federal government, absolutely. You need federal financing. You need unions. You need a workforce, but you need business and technology leaders. And the miss of the Democratic Party will be if we don't engage people like Elon and others to help achieve that vision. We need a reindustrialization economic revival in this country. Obama, in my view, was trying that with Tesla, with SpaceX. And that's why I mentioned Elon's role in the semiconductor area. I mean, maybe
Right.
could he help keep Intel here? So that would be my framework. And then I would approach Elon with a view on electric vehicle summit. What I would have done is, of course, I would have invited him to the summit. And I would have sat him next down to UAW, probably, to Sean Fain. And Elon would have probably found that funny. But I would
Yeah.
have said, Elon, when are we going to get Sean Fain to unionize? I mean, my point is, don't exclude, challenge. That's
Right.
leadership. And so now maybe we would have still lost him, but at least you're being honest about your perspective. I have never in my conversations with Elon said anything other than in fact, I've sometimes I've made a case why he should try to unionize, allow UAW to unionize. But the point is, I respect that he's a genius when it comes to the electric vehicle industry and Starlink, and when it comes to SpaceX. And I just think taking an objectively factual view is probably the best.
I guess I've asked about this, but I'm going to ask one more time in a different way. There is, there's something a little bit unsettling for a lot of people when someone of that magnitude of wealth and power has this type of political influence as well. And you mentioned Starlink. I mean, that is involved in a number of foreign policy entanglements, including what's happening in Ukraine. The electric vehicle. I mean, we are talking about right now the legislation that was passed in the Biden administration. It could be ripped up by the Trump administration. Obviously, Elon Musk has clear conflicts in that field. And then you have a social media company that he owns as well. Is there too much concentration of power happening here with one individual?
Yes, that's a problem in our democracy, but that's not limited to Elon Musk, who just elected a billionaire president for the second time. I mean, the problem. And
That's true.
And come on, the Democrats appoint all these millionaires ambassadors to half the world. I mean, we had more super PAC spending on our side than their side. So
Yeah.
I think it's the pot can't call the kettle black. You want to end the influence of money in politics, I gave a speech on the House floor. Let's commit to no super PAC spending in Democratic primaries. Let's commit to no corporate money into the DNC. Let's overturn Citizens United. Let's do what Maine did in regulating super PAC money, the contributions to super PACs. And let's talk about the reform of the system. But to sit there pretending when we're raising $1.5 billion and some of our billionaires would have been sitting as ambassador to France, that somehow we're, purer when it comes to money in politics, I don't think the American people find that compelling.
Yeah, ultimately, do you think that's the way that your party gets back in power, is to make the point that you got to get money out of politics, that there's too much corruption?
Absolutely. I think we have to look at what Bernie Sanders was doing on money in politics. We should start with saying there's an unholy alliance between wealth and power in this country. We're going to model good behavior by starting by saying no super PAC money in DNC primaries, no corporate money to the DNC. We're going to be focused more about talking to the Teamsters next election cycle than Beyonce. We're going to be more focused on a DNC that looks like working class and middle class Americans and their economic struggles than is just has sweets for donors. Obviously, I think that is to be the Democratic Party has to be more populist in its orientation.
All right, last question on DOGE, and then I'll let you go. In the end, do you suspect that it will have an impact? And relatedly, do you expect that no matter what, Congress will have a say in whatever recommendations they produce?
Congress almost always has a say. So yes.
Well, you said almost always, but that's different than always.
Yeah. But foreign policy, we've ceded our power, but on domestic policy, I expect Congress absolutely to have a say, and will be a huge advocate for that. My hope is when it comes to more competitiveness in our Department of Defense and procurements
Sure.
that we have recommendations that are taken.
Well, I can see procurement, and for instance, in IT, government IT is horrible, right? Procurement processes are horrible and opaque. Those are things where I can see potential agreements. But every other time that you and I have experienced efforts to reduce the deficit in spending, there just simply is not enough overlap between what the two parties want, and I don't understand why people should be optimistic that this will be any different.
Well, I don't think this is going to be what will reduce our structural deficits. You want to reduce our structural deficits, tax the wealthy more. Most of our debt is held by wealthy Americans, and so that would be the most obvious way to do it, and repealing the Bush and Donald Trump tax cuts to the very, very wealthy, and make sure that we're not engaged in these foreign wars. And in my view, have strategic cuts to the defense budget that modernize our military. But my view of DOGE, which is why I think that Democrats should at least have an open mind on things, is that it's not going to be able to solve our structural deficits unless Elon and Vivek propose taxing themselves more, which would be a pleasant recommendation. I mean, you never know.
I don't think I'm not holding my breath on that one.
But absent that, but if there are ways that they can improve enterprise software, which is totally defunct in the government, if there are ways that they can make the process more competitive, if they can,
but they're talking about cutting the NIH, like literally eliminating NIH.
I mean, in terms of obviously, I would oppose that with every fiber of my being. If they're cutting the NIH.
But you guys are on those are different planes. It's like different galaxies, right? Like, yeah, sure. IT reform would be great for the government, but is that really where we're
look, but the point is, if we can get some procurement reform, if we can get IT reform, if we can even show the American people that we're not going to be paying $150,000 for soap dispensers, whether that's at the Pentagon or some other agency, we start
soap
to rebuild trust. But I guess from a progressive perspective, I say, we are asking the government to do big things, to provide Medicare for all, to help provide free public college. We've got to be the party that also says we're for spending, but we're not for wasting. And that was the FDR model. And I guess that's I think why for progressives, we have a big stake in effective government, and that's why you see even Bernie Sanders being open to it. That's why Obama talked about wasteful spending. Bill Clinton, more centrist, but talked about government that works. I think that's a core idea that we shouldn't let the Republicans be the party for effective government.
Representative Khanna, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Very interesting conversation. We'll check back in July 2026 when the recommendations come down, see how they go. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Sam.